The wind had teeth out on the prairie, sharp and ceaseless, gnawing at flesh and memory alike. He rode with his collar high and his hat low, a man made more of silence than speech, shadow than shape. Folks in 3 counties knew him as Merritt Kane. Gunslinger once, ranch hand now, though not tethered long to any one post. He never gave cause or kin, just worked hard, paid in cash, and rode on when the weather shifted or the ghosts caught up. Merritt didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't fight unless cornered. He slept with his back to the wall and his boots still on, and never once, not in 7 long years of drifting since the war ended and the fire took his brother, had he let himself linger. He claimed he didn't knight anyone. But the land knew better. The wind held stories, carried voices, and some part of it, something older than memory and heavier than bone, was waiting. That spring the Platte overflowed her banks, and a late freeze turned the earth to iron beneath a crust of thaw. He found work mending fences on the edge of Holt County, for a widow named Evelyn March. She lived alone with her little sister in a house built by hands long since buried. A modest place, clapboard and ash gray, but the porch was swept clean, and there were daisies tucked in the kitchen window like hope wasn't such a foolish thing after all. She came out with a rifle slung low and a gaze level as the horizon. "You ride for Hargraves?" she asked, chin up like she didn't mind how tall he stood or how the sun caught the scar near his temple. "No, ma'am," Merritt said. "I don't ride for anyone." She studied him a long moment, her eyes the color of river silt, not quite brown, not quite gray. "Well, you ride careful then," she said, and turned back inside. He might have left, would have, if not for the laughter that floated out the moment the door swung shut behind her. Not hers, softer, younger. It came like birdsong after a long storm, sudden and disarming. The kind that nestled somewhere deep and ancient, uncoiling in the hollows of a man who'd forgotten he had warmth left to stir. By the time she came back out, that younger girl trailing behind her in a gingham dress, Merritt had already dismounted. "I can fix the gate," he said, voice low, throat thick with some half-formed wanting he didn't yet name. "You looking for work?" Evelyn asked. "I'll earn what I eat," he said. She studied him again. The girl behind her leaned out, peering at him with wide hazel eyes and a grin too big for her face. "He looks like he don't smile much," the girl said. "He don't need to," Evelyn replied, still watching him. "Come back round sundown if you mean to stay." He did, not because he needed to, because her laughter, like sunlight through the cracks of something long sealed, had already started to settle in his bones. The days that followed were built of ordinary things, nails and hammer, water drawn by hand, a broken wheel patched. He worked mostly in silence, but the rhythm of tasks steadied something in him. Evelyn was no less quiet. She watched him with a wary sort of patience, as if she knew men came with trouble but couldn't quite see where his lay. The girl, June, talked enough for all 3. She was 16 and wild-limbed, a flash of movement and mischief, and she liked to sit on the fence rail near where Merritt worked and ask him questions he didn't always answer. "Did you fight," she asked one morning, "in the war?" He paused, hammer mid-swing. "Yes." "Blue or gray?" "Blue." "You kill anyone?" He didn't answer. June didn't ask again. She just hummed a tune that reminded him of his mother's lullabies and kicked her heels against the wood. After a moment, Evelyn called her back to the house, and Merritt watched her go, that quiet ache starting up again in the place where he used to keep his future. Nights were colder, the wind didn't relent, and the sky stretched wide with stars that seemed to mourn. Evelyn cooked simply but well, beans, cornbread, sometimes rabbit or trout if he brought one back from the river. They ate at the table like a family that wasn't one, and Merritt never stayed long after the dishes were cleared. Then came the night he returned later than usual, soaked through and bloodied. A wild boar had caught him by surprise near the ravine. He managed to kill it, but not before it opened a ragged gash along his ribs. He staggered back to the porch as the last light bled from the sky and collapsed before he could call out. When he woke, it was to firelight and the smell of clean linen. His shirt was gone, bandages wrapped tight. Evelyn sat in the chair beside the hearth, her eyes rimmed with worry, her hands still flecked with dried blood. She didn't speak right away. "You got yourself near killed," she said finally. "I've had worse," he rasped. "You shouldn't have to," she said, and stood to fetch more water. In the days that followed, she nursed him without question. He slept in the spare room. June brought him books and stories and asked if he'd ever been to New Orleans. Evelyn kept her distance, but sometimes, when she thought he was asleep, he caught her watching him, that same unreadable weight in her gaze. He'd planned to leave before summer. But by the time his ribs stopped aching and he could lift the axe again, the garden was blooming and June had taken to braiding flowers into his hatband when she thought he wasn't looking. And Evelyn had started to laugh again. Not often. But once, when June burned the biscuits and Merritt deadpan that charcoal made for fine eating, Evelyn's laugh rang out, rough and startled and full of life. It did something to him, lit up the darkness he'd carried like a second skin. He went quiet after, retreating to the barn like he always did when he felt too much. He claimed he didn't need anyone. But her laughter lingered. It settled like warmth into the marrow of him. He began to dream again, not of fire or war or hollow-eyed boys, but of hands in soil, of voices at dusk, of a place to return to. The wind still howled across the prairie, but something in Merritt Kane had begun, quietly, stubbornly, to root. Merritt started rising before the rooster, not out of habit, but to see the light crack open over the plains before it touched the windows. Something about that first gold spill across the frost-trimmed grass felt like a promise, quiet and undeserved. He split wood, mended tack, fixed the leaning north fence without being asked. When June was stung by a wasp near the barn and cried into her sister's apron, he found the salve, ground the root, and handed it over without a word. Evelyn didn't thank him, just met his eyes and nodded, as if that moment stitched something between them both, thread finer than sight but strong as wire. By mid-June, he'd been there near 3 months. No one mentioned it. No one needed to. Some days he rode into town to fetch feed or flour, and folks began to greet him like he was part of the land now. One evening he returned with a spool of yellow ribbon tucked under his coat, handed it to June without preamble. She squealed like a pup and flung her arms around him before he could step back. "You're all right for a grouch," she said. Evelyn watched from the porch. Later, after June had gone to bed and the fire was dying low, she stepped into the kitchen where Merritt was sorting nails by size. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "She misses softness," Evelyn said, folding a dish towel. "Our mama died birthing her, and our pa, he never had much use for laughter." He didn't ask what happened to their father. The way her voice curled around his absence said enough. "You stayed longer than you meant to," she added after a beat, eyes steady on him. "I reckon I did." "Why?" He paused, the smallest nail caught between thumb and forefinger. "Sometimes the wind don't carry you as far as you think it will." Her smile was faint but real. "That mean you're staying?" He didn't answer, didn't have to. The next morning, he started laying plans for a new chicken coop. Evelyn brought him coffee before he'd driven the first post. They fell into rhythm after that. Not close, not loud, but sure. They moved around each other like stars in slow orbit, each aware of the other's pull, careful not to drift too near or too far. Merritt found himself listening for her footsteps, her quiet hum when she shelled peas or kneaded dough. He didn't touch her, but he stood closer than he used to, lingered longer in the doorway when she spoke. One night the sky split open with a thunderstorm so fierce the panes rattled and the horses screamed. June clambered down from her bed, tear-streaked and shaking, and Merritt found himself standing in the hall, not knowing what to do with his hands. Evelyn gathered the girl into her arms, whispering nonsense, rocking her slow. Merritt stayed until the storm passed, just in case she needed him. The next day he found Evelyn at the creek, her skirts tucked up and her arms bare, scrubbing laundry against the stones. Her hair was loose, and her laughter rose sharp and clear when June slipped and landed with a splash beside her. That laugh, it didn't come easy, but when it did, it cracked something wide open in him. Not just want, though there was that burning and thick, but something older, recognition, like a man hearing his name spoken truly for the first time in years. He turned away before they saw him watching. But that sound, her laughter, stayed with him all through the walk back to the house, settled under his ribs like a second heartbeat. Later, he was sitting on the porch, sharpening his knife, when Evelyn joined him with a tin cup and 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth. "You okay?" "I'm fine. You look like you seen a ghost." He shook his head, not trusting himself to answer. She sat, sipped once, twice. You ever think about putting down roots? I tried once, he said. What happened? Fire. They sat in silence a long while. The prairie stretched out before them, lit by a low, rust-colored sun. When June was little, she said quietly, she used to ask why I didn't laugh more. I told her it wasn't needed, that there were better uses for breath than joy. He glanced over. She believed me for a while, then she grew older and decided I was wrong. She's right, he said before he could stop himself. Evelyn looked at him then, really looked, not with caution but with the weight of all she hadn't said. He held her gaze, the knife forgotten in his hand. The distance between them felt thinner than before, not erased, but waiting. I can't promise anything, she said. Neither can I. They sat until the sky went black and the coyotes called. Neither moved to go inside first. 2 weeks later, trouble rode in. Not with guns or noise, but in the form of a man in a fine coat and snake-leather boots. His name was Drayton March, and he said he was June's father. Evelyn turned white as frost when she saw him. Merritt stepped in front of her without thinking. Drayton smiled like he'd won a hand before it was dealt. I just came to see what's mine, he said. June stood frozen behind the screen door. She's not yours, Evelyn said, voice tight. You left, drunk and raging. You signed away your rights and you know it. I signed what you put in front of me. Don't make it binding. She ain't your property. He sneered. Don't need her to be, just need a reason. You can't keep me from seeing my own blood. Merritt stepped forward. You can ride out now, peaceful, or you can stay and find the cold end of my patience. Drayton's eyes narrowed. Who the hell are you? I'm the one she laughs with. It wasn't bravado, just truth, spoken plain. Drayton hesitated, looked at Merritt's stance, the set of his jaw, the quiet certainty in his posture. He spat in the dirt. This ain't over. But he rode out. Evelyn didn't speak for a long time after. Not that day, not the next. Merritt gave her space. He knew the old wounds had split open again. When she finally came to him, it was after sundown. She didn't knock, just walked into the barn where he was oiling his saddle and said, "Thank you." He turned, saw the weight she carried, the iron in her spine, the tremble in her fingers. He won't touch her, Merritt said. I know. Then she reached for him, not with desperation, but with a quiet resolve. Her hand found his, her fingers curled around his knuckles. And just like that, something shifted. Not passion, not possession. Just belonging. And somewhere inside Merritt Kane, a man who'd sworn he needed nothing and no one, the last of his walls crumbled. Quiet as dusk, sure as dawn. Her laughter had settled in his bones, and he wasn't going anywhere. Summer deepened, ripening into heat and stillness. The creek ran low and the air grew thick with cicadas. Evelyn took to tying her hair up with the ribbon June had given her, and Merritt learned the shape of her in silence, how her fingers curled when she read, how she stepped around loose boards on the porch without looking, how she leaned on her left hip when she was tired but wouldn't admit it. They didn't speak of what passed between them in the barn. No need to. She made space for him in small ways, coffee poured before he asked, shirts mended and folded on the rail. He built her a swing from rope and pine, hung it beneath the cottonwood. June said it was silly, and then sat in it every evening until stars came out. Merritt found himself humming while he worked, just low tunes from before the war, from before his brother's last letter and the burning house in Kentucky. His hands healed faster now. His sleep grew deeper. Evelyn still kept her thoughts tucked tight, but she'd started leaving the kitchen door unlatched at night, and that meant more than anything she could have said aloud. Drayton didn't return, not yet, but Merritt kept one gun loaded in the grain bin and another beneath the floorboards of the barn, just in case. It was a Wednesday when the letter came. June found it in town, shoved in her hands by the postmaster with a wary glance. He asked where you lived, she said, eyes wide, but I didn't say, I swear it. Evelyn read the letter alone, by lamplight, face set like flint. When she came out, Merritt was splitting kindling, shirt dark with sweat. He's petitioning, she said. Says he's cleaned up, has work, wants visitation. Merritt drove the axe through the stump with too much force. I ain't letting him take her, Evelyn said, quieter. He looked at her. You don't have to fight him alone. I ain't used to the other kind of fighting. I am. They talked to a lawyer. Merritt rode with her to the next county, sat in the back of the office while Evelyn explained everything. Her voice never shook. Not when she spoke of nights she'd locked June in the root cellar to keep her safe. Not when she told of bruises, of running barefoot through snow, of hiding in churches with no name. Merritt watched her and knew something hard and holy had taken root in that house. He didn't call it love yet, but it felt close. The court date was set for September. They spent August gathering what they'd need: letters from neighbors, testimonies, documents. Merritt carved a wooden box to hold it all, initials etched soft into the lid, J.M. One night, while June was off with a neighbor's boy and the air was thick with the scent of clover and rain, Evelyn stood at the edge of the porch and said, "I dreamed of fire last night." Merritt set his book down. "But it wasn't the house. It was the field, dry wheat burning. I was running toward it, not away." "You think it means something." "I think maybe it's time I stopped being afraid of what's behind me." He walked to her, close enough to feel the heat off her skin. "Whatever comes," he said, "I'm staying." She looked at him then, full and open. Her face didn't soften, it steadied. "I believe you." He touched her cheek, just once, then let his hand fall. She didn't move away. When September came, the three of them rode into town together. June wore her Sunday dress. Merritt carried the box. Evelyn walked straight-backed into the courthouse and didn't look at Drayton once. The judge was old, blunt. He asked hard questions. Evelyn answered every one. Drayton tried to charm, said he'd changed. He hadn't touched a drop in a year, had a stable job. Was her blood, wasn't he? Didn't that count for something? The judge listened. Then Merritt stood. "I ain't kin," he said, "but I've been here long enough to know what kind of home they made." He told of Evelyn's strength, of June's laughter, of mornings so still you could hear the cottonwood leaves turn, of Evelyn's hand, burned once while baking, wrapped in a cloth while she still finished supper. "She raised that girl with nothing but grit and grace," he said. "You put her in that man's hands again, you're undoing everything good she ever built." The courtroom was quiet when he sat down. The judge ruled the next day, full custody to Evelyn March, no visitation. Drayton cursed, stormed out. June cried into her sister's shoulder. Merritt didn't speak, just stood with them both. On the ride back, Evelyn looked over, her hair lifting in the wind. "You didn't have to stand up." "I did." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because you're the kind of woman men don't get to know twice." She reached across the wagon bench, her fingers finding his. "I think I'm done running," she said. "Then we build." And they did, a little at a time, fencing the far pasture, planting late beans, adding shelves in the root cellar. They still didn't speak of love. But it lived in the spaces between things, in the way he carved her initials into the barn door, in the way she brushed dust from his collar before supper, in the way June started calling him Merritt like it meant home. The wind softened, the nights turned cooler. And Merritt Kane, who once believed he didn't need anyone, now found himself waiting each evening for the sound of her laughter. It came often now, bright and unashamed, the kind of sound that could anchor a man. Or save him. Frost arrived early that year. The first thin sheet of it glazed the windows before the equinox even passed, silvering the pasture in the quiet hours before dawn. Evelyn stood barefoot at the threshold one morning, steam rising from her mug, and watched Merritt move through it like he belonged, boots crunching, breath visible, his silhouette familiar as breath. Inside, June stitched new curtains from burlap sacks and sang as she worked, her voice still sweet despite the changing seasons. She was 17 now, taller and sharper in her growing, but no less the heart of the house. Merritt fixed the stovepipe before the snows came and added a brace to the porch roof where the timber had begun to bow. Evelyn offered to help, but he only shook his head and said, "I got you." He said it simply, like a truth that didn't need questioning. It was the first time Evelyn realized she'd begun to need him. Not for safety, she'd survived worse. Not for help, she knew how to manage lean times, empty cupboards, men with sharp tempers and sharper lies. But for the steadiness, the constancy, the way he moved through their life like he meant to be there until the last plank was worn smooth and every fence rail weathered down to silver. And Merritt, for his part, began to speak more, not much but enough. He told her once by the hearth about his brother, how the fire hadn't taken him quick, how Merritt had tried to pull him out but the beam had fallen too fast, how he hadn't stayed for the burial. "Didn't feel like I earned that kind of goodbye," he said. Evelyn reached for his hand, held it quiet and warm. "That's not how grace works," she whispered. That night when they touched, slow, sure, reverent, it was not to fill a hollow but to recognize what had already grown between them. It was not urgent. It was not fragile. It was real. And in the stillness after, as the wind bent the trees and the fire sank low, Evelyn turned to him and said, "I think I might be happy." Merritt didn't answer with words, just kissed the back of her hand and stayed. They planned for winter together. Pickled late cucumbers, salted pork, dried corn. Evelyn drew up lists while Merritt reinforced the stable. June hung herbs to dry and started writing poetry in the margins of old seed catalogs. There was peace in the doing. Until the dog came back limping. She was an old mutt June had rescued from a trap line the year before. Hadn't left the porch since. But one morning she dragged herself in with a bleeding flank and fear in her eyes. Something had cut her, deep and deliberate. Merritt went still. He crouched, examined the wound, and then rose with a look Evelyn hadn't seen since the courthouse. "Wasn't an animal," he said. "You think it's him." He didn't answer, just went out to check the perimeter, rifle in hand. They started, locking the doors again. June asked if they should leave, go east, somewhere no one knew them. Evelyn said no. "He's taken too much already." So they stayed, but vigilance settled like smoke into their days. Merritt slept lighter. Evelyn kept a pistol under the flour tin. June stopped walking to the creek alone. One evening, Merritt came in late, dirt on his boots, jaw tight. He placed something on the table, a shell casing, polished clean. He left it near the north fence. Evelyn's hands curled into fists. "He's toying with us." "He wants us scared," Merritt said. "Wants you to run." "But I won't." Merritt reached out, touched her wrist. "You won't have to." They didn't know when Drayton would come, only that he would. It was October when he did. Cold, dark, quiet as a whisper. He waited until dusk, when June was inside singing, when the lamps had just been lit. He came from the tree line, fast, low, a knife in hand and something wild in his face. He didn't call out, didn't threaten. He meant to end it. But Merritt had seen the shift in the wind, the way the horses pricked their ears, the unnatural still of the dusk. He met Drayton by the barn. They fought hard and fast. No flourish, no words. Just fists and breath and the fury of old wounds. Evelyn arrived with the rifle. She didn't shoot. Didn't need to. Drayton was on the ground, blood in his teeth, face twisted with rage and failure. "You won't come back," she said. He laughed. "You think he'll always be here?" "Yes," she said. He looked at Merritt, barely standing, then spat and said, "Then he's a fool." Merritt, breathing hard, met Evelyn's eyes. "If that's what it is," he said, voice gravel low, "I'll wear the name proud." They left Drayton in town, handed over to the sheriff. The judge issued an order. He wouldn't come back. Not again. Afterward, the silence was the hardest. Evelyn sat at the table and stared at her hands. June wouldn't stop crying. Merritt stood at the edge of the porch and watched the moon rise. That night Evelyn came to him where he sat by the fire, her shoulders bare, her eyes red. She didn't speak, just wrapped herself around him. They didn't need words. The worst was over. But the healing, the long, slow grace of mending was only just beginning. Winter settled in like a hush, deep and solemn. Snow came slow at first, then steady, layering the world in silence. The trees grew heavy with it, limbs bowed like old shoulders beneath time. The wind changed its voice, no longer cruel, but aching like it, too, remembered something lost. In that quiet, life folded inward. The days were built around firewood, wool blankets, the scent of stewed apples, the creak of the porch under frost-heavy boots. Merritt rose before dawn to keep the stove fed. Evelyn learned the sound of his footfall on every board. June wrote letters to imaginary pen pals, filled pages with wild dreams and real fears, then tucked them in the attic beneath old quilts. They didn't speak of Drayton anymore, not directly, but sometimes Merritt would glance at the back fields with a watchful eye, or Evelyn would startle at a knock too sudden. Time dulled the sharpness, but never quite erased it. Still, they healed. Not all at once, not in the ways stories sometimes promise, but in slow, human ways. One morning, Merritt took June hunting. She returned grinning, flushed with pride and wind, a pheasant in hand. He said I had a clean shot, she told Evelyn, breathless. Later, when she was asleep by the fire, Evelyn turned to him, her face unreadable in the shifting light. "She's safer because of you. I just gave her the space to be brave," he said. Evelyn studied him. "No one ever did that for me." "You don't need saving." "No, but I think maybe I needed witnessing." He moved to her, touched her cheek with rough fingers, worn soft from work and tenderness. "I see you," he said. Not a promise, a truth. And she believed him. Spring didn't rush in. It came in pulses, mud thaw the call of returning birds. The creek swelled, brown with melt, and the sky held longer light each evening. Evelyn planted early radish and carrot, onion and sweet pea. Merritt built a bench beneath the cottonwood, and June painted wildflowers across its back with a brush made from horsehair. One afternoon, when the soil was warm beneath her knees, Evelyn found a ring tucked inside the bread tin. No fanfare, no note. Just silver and quiet steadiness, and a question asked in absence. She found him by the pasture gate. "You didn't ask," she said. "I figured you, answer in your own time." She held up the ring, eyes shining. "I don't need a church." "Neither do I. I just need you to be here, not perfect, just present." "I've been here since the first time you laughed," he said. She stepped into him, laid her forehead against his. "I didn't know I had anything left to give," she whispered. "You didn't give it," he said. "It rose up in you, same as spring." They wed beneath the cottonwood, just them, June, and the open sky. No vows read aloud, just hands held, gazes locked, and a silence so full it sang. June read from a book she'd found at the library, a passage about light, about roots, about choosing love each day like water, like bread. They didn't need more. The house changed after, not in structure but in feel. Merritt started building a new room off the back, said it was for tools, but Evelyn hung a quilt on the wall and called it "Some Day's Nursery." He didn't argue. June began writing real letters, not just to imaginary friends, but to women she met in town, to girls with bruises and strong backs. She told them about strength and fear, and how a man can show love by staying when it's hard, by learning the rhythm of a quiet house and making it his own. Sometimes Evelyn would wake in the middle of the night and find Merritt staring out the window, the stars reflected in his eyes. "You okay?" she'd whisper. And always he'd say, "More than okay." Because he was. The man who'd once claimed he didn't need anyone had found what no amount of wandering or war could offer. Not salvation, but sanctuary. Not rescue, but recognition. Her laughter still echoed through him every day. It had settled in his bones, made a home there. And for the first time in a life made of departures, Merritt Kane stayed.